It was raining the night everything changed. Not a gentle Seattle mist. A punishing, biblical downpour that turned the streets into rivers and made the sky feel like a collapsing ceiling. The kind of rain that chased everyone indoors. Everyone was somewhere to go. Chidinma Okafor had nowhere to go. She sat on the concrete under the green awning of a closed restaurant in downtown Seattle. Her knees pulled her chest, her braids dripping water onto the plastic bag in her lap. The bag contained her phone, her driver's license, and $63 in crumpled bills. That was everything. The sum total of 4 years of marriage, reduced to what a woman could carry when she was thrown out her own home with 15 minutes warning. 40 minutes ago, she had been standing on the porch of the house she'd shared with Marcus Belmont. The house she had painted, furnished, cleaned on her hands and knees, filled with prayers whispered into the ceiling at 3 a.m. when she thought God might be listening more closely. She'd come home from fertility clinic, the 6th visit that month, to find the locks changed and her mother-in-law standing in the doorway like a sentry. He's found someone who can give him children. You're no longer needed here. Not Marcus, not her husband of 4 years. His mother, the woman who had spent 2 years watching Chidinma inject hormones into her own stomach, endure procedure after procedure, sit in waiting rooms full of pregnant women, while her body refused to do the one thing everyone told her it was designed to do, and had decided, finally, that Chidinma's womb was a defect that disqualified her from the family. Marcus hadn't even come to the door. He was inside, somewhere behind the curtains Chidinma had chosen, sitting on furniture Chidinma had picked out, breathing air in rooms Chidinma had made beautiful. And he let his mother do it, let the old woman hand Chidinma a plastic bag and close the door in her face like she was dismissing the help. For years, 2 years of genuine love. Then 2 years of mounting pressure that curdled into blame, then cruelty, then silence so cold it burned. For years, and it ended with a change lock and a bag that weighed less than a pound. She had walked for over an hour, past bus stops where she didn't have enough for fare, past hotels she couldn't afford, past the apartment building where she and Marcus had lived when they were first married and still touched each other like they meant it. She walked until her shoes squelched with every step and her dress clung to her body like a second skin, and the rain had washed away the tears so thoroughly that she couldn't tell where the storm ended and her grief began. She found the awning by accident, a dark green canopy over the entrance of a restaurant called Sirak, an upscale Korean establishment with floor-to-ceiling windows and a brass-handled door. It was closed, the interior dark, but the awning was wide enough to keep the worst of the rain off. Chidinma sank to the ground, wrapped her arms around her knees, and stared at the wet street without seeing it. She did not know that the building had 6 floors above the restaurant. She did not know that the top floor was a penthouse that belonged to the owner. She did not know that the owner was currently sitting in a leather chair in front of a wall of security monitors, watching her. Sean-Ho Kong leaned forward in his chair, his eyes fixed on the woman on screen 4. He was 29 years old, which made him the youngest man to ever hold his position, head of the Kong family, controllers of the most powerful Korean-American syndicate operation on the West Coast. He had held the seat for 4 years, since his father died of a heart attack in this very building, collapsing at his desk surrounded by men who feared him and not a single person who loved him. Seon-ho had watched his father die the way his father had lived, efficiently, coldly, and alone. He looked nothing like a man who ran an empire. He was lean rather than bulky, with sharp cheekbones, a clean-shaven angular jaw, and medium-length jet-black hair swept back from his forehead with a kind of effortless volume that made people look twice. His eyes were dark, monolid, and deeply set beneath a heavy brow that gave him a permanent expression of quiet intensity. He wore a dark navy 3-piece suit, jacket vest, white shirt with the top 2 buttons undone, and an intricate dark Korean dragon tattoo crawled up the right side of his neck from beneath his collar. Both hands were covered in ornate dark ink. Fingers, knuckles, backs. The kind of tattoos that told stories in a language most people couldn't read. He watched the woman on the screen for 7 minutes. In those 7 minutes, 14 people walked past her. 2 glanced. None stopped. 1 man with an umbrella gave her a wide berth, as if poverty were contagious. Seon-ho stood up, put on his coat, and took the elevator downstairs. Chidinma heard the footsteps before she saw him. Expensive shoes on wet concrete, a deliberate, unhurried rhythm that cut through the white noise of the rain. She looked up and saw a man standing at the edge of the awning, holding an umbrella he didn't seem to need since he was already under the canopy. He was younger than she expected. The tattoos on his neck and hands suggested danger. The suit suggested money. The expression on his face suggested something she couldn't quite place. Not pity, not curiosity, but a kind of recognition, as if he'd seen this scene before. "You've been sitting here for 7 minutes," he said. His voice was low, measured, faintly accented at the edges. 14 people have walked past you. None of them stopped. Chidinma stared at him. "You were watching me?" "Security cameras." He nodded toward the small lens above the door. "This is my building. I'm not trespassing. I'll leave when the rain stops. It's Seattle. It won't stop until March." The faintest ghost of something, not quite a smile, but the space where a smile would go, crossed his face. "I have a guest suite upstairs. Dry clothes, a bed, a locked door between you and the rest of the world. You can leave in the morning." Chidinma's eyes narrowed. "I don't know you." "No. And you want me to go upstairs with a stranger at midnight in a city where women disappear. I want you to stop sitting in the rain." His tone hadn't changed, calm, direct, completely without performance. "But I understand why you wouldn't trust that. So..." He unshouldered his coat, a beautiful dark wool piece that probably cost more than her monthly rent, and draped it over her shoulders without touching her. Then he produced a business card from his vest pocket and placed it on the ground beside her. "When you're ready to stop sitting in the rain," he said, "call that number." He turned and walked back inside. The door closed behind him. The lobby lights dimmed. Chidinma sat with his coat around her shoulders, the wool heavy and warm and smelling of cedar and something darker, and stared at the business card. CNH Kong, Sierra Group, a phone number, nothing else. She didn't call that night. She found a women's shelter 6 blocks east and slept on a cot in a room with 11 other women. Every one of them carrying a version of the same story. A man who decided they weren't enough. She called 3 days later. Not because she wanted to, because Marcus had frozen their joint accounts, reported her debit card stolen, and canceled her phone plan. She'd managed to get a prepaid phone from the shelter. She had applied to 9 jobs in 3 days and heard nothing. She had eaten twice. And the only number she possessed that wasn't connected to her old life was printed on a business card she'd been carrying in her pocket, like a lifeline she was too proud to use. The phone rang once before he answered. "Chidinma?" He said her name as if he'd been waiting for it. "Where are you?" "The women's shelter on Pike." "I'm not calling because I need rescuing. I need a job. Do you know anyone who's hiring? Anything, restaurant, retail, I don't care. I just need to work." A pause. She could almost hear him recalibrating, adjusting from whatever he'd planned to say to something that respected what she'd actually asked. "My new restaurant location opens in Capitol Hill in 2 weeks. I need a general manager, someone who knows food service, operations, staffing. It pays well. It comes with an apartment above the location. You don't know if I'm qualified. You managed Premier Catering for 3 years before your marriage. You grew their revenue 40%. You were the youngest general manager in their company history." Another pause. "I told you, security cameras aren't my only resource." Chidinma closed her eyes. He had investigated her. She should be furious. Instead, she felt something she hadn't felt in months, seen, not as a barren woman or a failed wife or a charity case, but as a person with a history that existed before Marcus Belmont decided to erase it. "One condition," she said. "This stays professional. No favors, no special treatment, no pity." "Agreed." "I mean it, Ho. I'm not a project." "No," he said, and something in his tone made her breath catch. "You're not." She started Monday. The Capitol Hill restaurant opened to a full house on a Friday night, and Chidinma ran it like she'd been born behind a host stand. She was precise, warm, and utterly unflappable, managing a staff of 23 with the quiet authority of someone who has spent years making other people's chaos look effortless. Ho came by on opening night and stood in the kitchen doorway, watching her navigate a double booking. a kitchen fire minor, and a food critic surprise visit without breaking stride. "You're staring," she said, passing him with a tray of complimentary desserts for the critic's table. "I'm assessing my investment." "Assess faster. Table 12 needs wine." He almost smiled. Almost. Over the following weeks, their professional relationship developed the kind of rhythm that comes from mutual respect and the unspoken understanding that both of them were holding something back. Sien-ho visited the restaurant 3 or 4 times a week, always under pretense of business, always staying longer than necessary, always finding reasons to be wherever Chidinma was. She noticed. Of course she noticed. She noticed the way his eyes tracked her across a room, the way his voice changed when he spoke to her, losing its clipped efficiency and softening into something almost conversational. She noticed the tattoos, the bodyguard who occasionally appeared near the entrance, the way other Korean men deferred to him with respect that bordered on fear. She noticed, and she kept her distance, because Chidinma Okafor had spent 4 years loving a man who turned her into a vessel for his legacy, and she was not about to become anyone's anything ever again. But distance has a half-life when 2 people share a kitchen after midnight. It happened on a Wednesday, 3 weeks after opening. The last customer had left, the staff had gone home, and Chidinma was doing final inventory when she heard piano music drifting from somewhere above the restaurant. Faint, haunting, technically perfect but aching with emotion, like someone was playing with wounds instead of fingers. She followed the sound up the back stairwell to the 2nd floor and found a door slightly ajar. Inside was a room she hadn't known existed, soundproofed, sparsely furnished, containing nothing but a grand piano and a bench. And Sien-ho, sitting with his back to her, his suit jacket discarded, his sleeves rolled to the elbows, playing a piece so beautiful it made her chest hurt. She must have made a sound because he stopped abruptly, his hands freezing on the keys. "I didn't know you played," she said from the doorway. He didn't turn around. "No one does." "Why?" A long silence. "My mother was a music teacher. She wanted me to go to conservatory. She died when I was 15. My father said music was weakness. He burned her piano the week after the funeral." His voice was flat, controlled. "I bought a new one the day he died. Kept it here. Never told anyone." Chidinma stepped into the room and sat beside him on the bench. She didn't ask permission. She didn't speak. She just sat there, shoulder to shoulder with the most dangerous man she'd ever met, and waited. He played again. Something softer this time. A Korean melody she didn't recognize, but felt in her bones. When he finished, the silence between them was different from before. It was a silence of 2 people who had just shown each other something real. "Your ex-husband," Sien-ho said quietly. "Marcus Belmont." Chidinma tensed. "What about him?" "He's been watching you. He hired a private investigator. The PI has been photographing the restaurant, your apartment, my building." He turned to face her, and his eyes, those dark, intense, impossible eyes, held something she'd never seen in them before. Concern. "He's not trying to get you back. Chidinma, he's trying to punish you for leaving." "I didn't leave. He threw me out. Men like Marcus don't see the difference. You were his property. Now you're thriving without him. That's an insult his ego can't survive." "How do you know all this?" "Because his PI made the mistake of surveilling my building. My security team identified him on day 2. He paused. "And because Marcus didn't just hire an investigator. He contacted the Yoon family." The name meant nothing to Chidinma, but she saw what it did to Sien-ho's expression. A tightening, a coldness that hadn't been there a moment ago. "Who are the Yoons?" "A rival family. They wanted my territory for years. Marcus gave them everything his PI found, my operations, my business records, my connections to things you don't need to know about yet." He held her gaze. "He's trying to destroy me. Chidinma. And he's using people far more dangerous than he understands to do it." The weight of it settled over her like a second storm. Her ex-husband hadn't just moved on. He was actively trying to demolish the man who'd given her shelter, using the criminal underworld as his weapon. "Is it working?" she asked. "Not yet, but it will. The Yoons are patient, and Marcus gave them exactly what they needed." He looked at the piano keys. There's something else you should know. Something I should have told you before. Tell me now. He told her everything. The syndicate, the operations, imports, construction contracts, shadow financing. The fact that the restaurant group was legitimate, but the money that originally built it came from places that would make her sick. He told her about his father, who built the empire on a philosophy that love was a liability. He told her that he had inherited the throne at 25 and spent 4 years maintaining it because he didn't know how to do anything else. He told her the truth, all of it, without softening a single edge. When he finished, the piano room was very quiet. You should leave, he said. Walk away from this restaurant, this building, and me. I can set you up with enough money to start over somewhere Marcus can't find you. You'd be safe. Chidinma looked at this man, this 29-year-old carrying a dead mother's dream in a soundproofed room, running an empire he never wanted, offering to fund her escape, even though it meant losing the only person who'd made his penthouse feel less empty. I spent 4 years with a man who hid who he really was until it destroyed me, she said. I'd rather stand beside someone dangerous who tells me the truth than someone safe who lies to my face. Sian-Ho stared at her. You're not afraid? I'm terrified, but I'm done making decisions based on fear. The silence that followed was charged with something neither of them could take back. Chidinma, play something, she said softly. Play me what your mother loved. He turned back to the piano. His hands found the keys, and the music that filled the room was so tender, so aching, so full of everything he couldn't say with words, that Chidinma pressed her hand over her mouth and let the tears come. When the last note faded, Sian-Ho turned to her. She was right there, close enough to see the slight tremor in his jaw, the way his eyes searched her face for permission. He kissed her, gently, a question more than a statement. And when she kissed him back, he made a sound against her mouth, a quiet, broken thing, like a man who'd been holding his breath for years and finally remembered how to exhale. They stayed in the piano room until the city outside began to lighten. They didn't talk about the Yuns or Marcus or the empire that was closing around them like a fist. They just sat shoulder to shoulder on a piano bench while the most dangerous man on the West Coast played his dead mother's music for the only person he'd ever trusted enough to hear it. It was the last peaceful night either of them would have for a long time. If this story already has your heart in a chokehold, you need to subscribe to Echoed True Stories right now. Hit that notification bell, because Marcus Belmont's revenge is just getting started, and what Sian-Ho does next will shock you. Trust me, you don't want to miss this. Marcus Belmont sat in his home office at 2 a.m, staring at a laptop screen full of documents he didn't fully understand, feeling more powerful than he had in months. The PI's work was thorough. Financial records connecting Sian-Ho Kang's restaurant group to shell companies with ties to Korean syndicate operations. Photographs of men entering Sian-Ho's building who appeared in federal databases. Transaction logs that showed money moving through Sirak's accounts in patterns that no legitimate restaurant could justify. It was enough. More than enough. Marcus had delivered copies of everything to Yoon family 3 weeks ago, and the results were already showing. Anonymous tips had triggered surprise health inspections at all 3 of Sian-Ho's restaurant locations in a single day. A business reporter at the Seattle Tribune had received a thick envelope and was now making phone calls. And the Yoon patriarch, an old man named Yoon Tae-young, who spoke in whispers and smiled like a surgeon about a cut, had assured Marcus that this was only the beginning. Marcus took a drink of whiskey and felt the warm satisfaction of a man watching a building burn from a safe distance. He didn't want Chidinma back. Not really. The new woman, Brittany, was younger, prettier, eager to please in ways Chidinma had never been. Brittany didn't argue, didn't have opinions about how he spent his money, didn't look at him with the quiet disappointment that Chidinma had perfected in their final year. Brittany was easy. Chidinma had been difficult. But Chidinma thriving? Chidinma running a restaurant and living above it and laughing in Instagram photos with staff that adored her? Chidinma moving on as if Marcus Belmont had been a pothole in her road instead of the road itself? That was unacceptable. And the Korean boy, that tattooed child playing restaurant owner with money that smelled like crime, thinking he could just collect Marcus's discarded wife like a piece of furniture someone left on the curb? No, Marcus Belmont didn't lose. Not to a Barren woman. Not to a Korean gangster. Not to anyone. The Tribune article hit on a Thursday morning. Seattle restaurant mogul linked to Korean syndicate operations. The headline stretched across the front page of the online edition, complete with financial diagrams, source documents, and quotes from anonymous insiders. By noon, every news outlet in the Pacific Northwest had picked it up. By evening, CNHO's accountant called to say the IRS had frozen 3 business accounts pending investigation. By midnight, the Capitol Hill location had received a cease and desist from the city regarding its operating license. Chidinma stood in the empty restaurant at 1 a.m., chairs stacked on tables, reading the article for the 5th time on her phone. She could trace Marcus's fingerprints all over it. The specific details about CNHO's building, the photographs taken from angles that matched the PI's surveillance positions, the particular cruelty of the timing. Marcus had done this. He had reached into a world he didn't belong in, armed people he didn't understand, and lit a fuse that was now burning toward everyone she cared about. CNHO found her there. He looked like he hadn't slept, his suit slightly rumpled, his jaw tight, his eyes carrying a weight that made him look older than 29. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Bad enough. The IRS freeze will take weeks to resolve. The Yoons are using the publicity to approach my allies, telling them I'm compromised, that associating with me is a liability." He sat on the edge of a table. "And there's more. Tae-young sent a message through intermediaries this afternoon. He wants you to step down from the council, surrender my territory, and disappear. If I don't, he sends the next batch of documents directly to the FBI. The next batch." Marcus gave him everything. Chidinma, enough to connect not just my operations, but every family I'm allied with. If those documents reach federal investigators, it won't just be my world that burns. It'll be dozens of families across 3 states. The scope of it took her breath away. Marcus hadn't just aimed a weapon at CNHO. He had aimed at an entire network, hundreds of people, families, livelihoods, all because his ex-wife was happy without him. "What are you going to do?" CNHO was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was steady, certain, and completely calm. "I'm going to do the one thing no one expects." The council meeting took place in a building with no address, attended by representatives of every major Korean syndicate family on the West Coast. 14 people around a table that had hosted these conversations for decades. CNHO stood before them in his dark suit, hands in his pockets, neck tattoo visible above his collar, and said the words that made the room go silent. "I'm shutting it all down. Every operation, every shadow deal, every gray area business this family touches. Effective immediately." For 3 seconds, no one spoke. Then the room erupted. Junwoo, his second in command, stood so fast his chair scraped the floor. "You can't be serious. We're talking about hundreds of millions in operations. I'm talking about survival." CNHO's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Tae-young has documents that connect every family in this room to our operations. Documents handed to him by a civilian with a grudge and a credit card. A man named Marcus Belmont, a real estate broker with no connections to our world, managed to compile enough evidence to threaten the entire West Coast network." He let that settle. If a bitter ex-husband with a PI can do this, what happens when someone with real resources tries? Silence. The world is changing. The old ways, the shadows, the side deals, the assumption that we're untouchable, they don't work anymore. One newspaper article nearly destroyed my business in 24 hours. One civilian nearly brought down an organization that's existed for 40 years. He looked around the table. "I'm not shutting down because I'm weak. I'm shutting down because I refuse to let a man like Marcus Belmont have power over me, over any of us." Elder Cho, the most respected voice in the room, spoke from the far end of the table. "And the Yoon threat? By the time any document reaches any authority, there will be nothing left to find. Every family in this room that follows my lead will be clean, legitimate, untouchable, not because we're hiding, but because there's nothing to hide." CNHO paused. "The Yoons want to use Belmont's information as a weapon. I'm making that weapon useless." The vote took 40 minutes. It was not unanimous. The Yoons objected furiously. Junwoo abstained, but it was decisive. The transition would begin immediately. The months that followed were the hardest of Cian-Ho's life. Dismantling an empire was infinitely more difficult than building one. He lost associates who couldn't imagine life without the shadows. He lost revenue, influence, 3 allied families who thought he'd gone soft. He spent weeks in meetings with lawyers and accountants, converting shadow money into clean investment, restructuring companies, severing connections that had existed for decades. But he wasn't alone. Chidinma was beside him for every hour of it. She brought the same relentless competence to his corporate restructuring that she brought to restaurant management, organizing files, managing timelines, interfacing with lawyers who were initially skeptical of a 28-year-old Nigerian-American woman, sitting in on meetings about Korean syndicate finances, and quickly learned to stop underestimating her. They saved each other. That was the truth of it. Not a fairy tale where the man rescues a woman or the woman transforms a man, but a partnership between 2 people who have been broken by different forces and chose to rebuild together. Cian-Ho also did something quiet, strategic, and devastatingly effective. He cooperated with federal investigators, not as an informant, but as a businessman voluntarily disclosing past irregularities and restructuring for compliance. In the process, he provided just enough information to neutralize the Yoon family's leverage while protecting every allied family that had agreed to go legitimate. The Yoons were left holding documents that pointed to operations that no longer existed, connections that had been severed, and money that had been cleaned. Their leverage evaporated. And Marcus Belmont, the man who had handed a rival crime family an arsenal and expected to walk away clean, found himself in an entirely different position. Federal investigators, following threads from Cian-Ho's voluntary disclosure, discovered Marcus's role in the chain, a civilian who had compiled surveillance on a syndicate-connected individual and knowingly delivered that intelligence to a rival criminal organization for personal revenge. The legal term was conspiracy and criminal facilitation. Marcus Belmont had wanted to drag the Mafia down with Cian-Ho. Instead, he had dragged himself into a world that didn't let people leave when they got uncomfortable. On the night the last underground operation officially closed, Cian-Ho walked into the Capitol Hill restaurant kitchen at midnight. The dining room was dark, the chairs stacked, the staff long gone. Chidinma stood at the stove. A pot of jollof rice simmered on one burner. Her grandmother's recipe, the one that had turned his cold penthouse into something warm. 2 glasses of wine sat on the counter. She was wearing the apron she bought on her first supply run together, the one with a coffee stain on the pocket that she refused to wash out because she said it had character. She looked up when he walked in, and the expression on her face, soft, fierce, proud, loving, made his chest hurt in the way that only beautiful things could. "It's done," he said. "All of it. I'm clean. We're clean. I know." She picked up both glasses of wine and handed him one. "Jun-Woo called me an hour ago. Said you were, and I quote, the craziest and bravest man he's ever worked for. He's staying, by the way. Said he didn't survive 4 years of your leadership to quit when things got interesting." Cian-Ho took the wine and looked around the kitchen, at the gleaming surfaces Chidinma kept spotless, at the menu she'd helped redesign, at the space where their 2 worlds had collided and become something neither could have built alone. "Welcome home," Chidinma said. He kissed her, slow, deep, tasting of wine and jollof rice, and the particular sweetness of a man who had just walked away from everything he'd ever known and found that what remained was more than enough. "Home," he repeated against her mouth, as if testing the word for the first time. "Yeah, I think that's exactly what this is." He burned down an empire to build a life worth living, and Marcus Belmont's revenge just destroyed himself. Drop a comment and tell us, do you think Cian-Ho made the right call? Share this with someone who needs to hear that walking away is the bravest thing a strong person can do. And if you're not already part of the Echo True Stories family, what are you waiting for? Subscribe now. The ending will make you cry. The rooftop of the CIRAC building had never held a wedding before. It had held meetings that decided the fates of organizations. It had held conversations that no recording device would ever capture. It had held a 25-year-old man on the night his father died, standing alone in the dark, looking at the city below and wondering what kind of life he was inheriting. Now it held white chairs arranged in a semicircle, wild lavender in glass vases catching the late October light, string lights woven through a simple wooden arch, and a 29-year-old groom who could not stop his hands from shaking. Cian-ho stood at the altar in his dark navy suit with a black tie he'd let Chidinma pick out, his hair swept back, the dragon tattoo on his neck visible above his collar, his tattooed hands clasped in front of him. Mrs. Park, his childhood piano teacher, a quiet, silver-haired Korean woman in her 70s who had kept music alive in a boy whose father tried to silence it, sat in the front row with tears already streaming down her face. She had told Cian-ho that morning that his mother would have loved Chidinma. He'd had to leave the room. Chidinma's mother, Ngozi, had flown in from Houston and had been weeping with such consistency since her arrival 2 days ago that the hotel concierge had started leaving extra tissue boxes outside her door. Chidinma's younger sister, Amara, served as maid of honor and had delivered a rehearsal dinner toast that included the phrase, "If you hurt my sister, I know where you sleep, and I have a very particular set of skills," which earned a standing ovation and made Cian-ho's former associates exchange glances of genuine respect. The guest list was small. Restaurant staff who had become family. 3 friends from Chidinma's catering days who had driven up from Portland. Junwoo, who stood at the back in a suit that looked uncomfortable on a man more accustomed to leather jackets, dabbing his eyes with a handkerchief he would later deny owning. And Elder Cho, who had made the trip from San Francisco to give his personal blessing. Not as a council representative, but as an old man who wanted to see something good come out of a world that had produced so much darkness. No bodyguards, no security detail, no men with earpieces scanning the perimeter. That life was over. The rooftop held only love. The ceremony was simple, a blend of Korean and Nigerian traditions, a pie-beak bow honoring Cian-ho's heritage, cola nuts presented to Chidinma's mother honoring hers, and vows written by 2 people who had learned the hard way that the most powerful words are the honest ones. Cian-ho spoke first. "I watched you sit in the rain and refuse to break. I watched you build a life from nothing with your bare hands and more pride than anyone I've ever met. I watched you walk into my world without flinching and make it better just by being in it." He swallowed, his voice rough at the edges. "I don't deserve you, Chidinma. I know that, but I will spend every single day earning the right to stand beside you, because you're the reason I finally understood what my mother tried to teach me, that the strongest thing a man can do is let himself be soft." Chidinma's vows were shorter, and every word landed like a fist wrapped in silk. "You saw me when I was invisible. You valued me when I've been told I was worthless. You gave me a job when I needed dignity, and your heart when I needed hope. I love you, Cian-ho Kong, not because you're powerful, not because you saved me. I saved myself. I love you because you were brave enough to show me the piano room, because you played your mother's music for someone you'd known for 3 weeks and trusted me with the most fragile part of who you are. That's not weakness. That's the most courageous thing I've ever seen." Then Cian-ho did something that wasn't in the program. He walked to the corner of the rooftop where a grand piano had been wheeled into position that morning, covered in white flowers, gleaming in the golden hour light. He sat down, adjusted the bench, and placed his hands on the keys. He played his mother's sonata, the one he'd played for Chidinma in the soundproof room, the one no audience had ever heard. It was the first time Cian-ho Kong had played piano in front of other people in his entire life. His hands shook the first 8 bars. By the 16th bar, they were steady. By the bridge, the music had taken on a life of its own, tender, soaring, aching with all the grief and hope and love that it had spent 29 years learning to contain, and was finally setting free. Mrs. Park sobbed openly. Ngozi clutched Amara's hand, so hard the younger woman winced. Junwoo gave up all pretense and wiped his face with both hands. Even Elder Cho, a man who had seen more in his 70 years than most people could imagine, pressed his lips together and blinked rapidly at the sky. When the last note faded into evening air, Chidinma was standing beside the piano, tears running down her face, her hand resting on Cian-ho's shoulder. "Your mother would be so proud," she whispered. He covered her hand with his. "She'd say I waited too long." The reception was held downstairs in the restaurant. Tables pushed back, the menu a collision of Korean and Nigerian cuisine that Chidinma and the kitchen team had spent a week perfecting. Japchae beside jollof rice, bulgogi next to suya, kimchi jjigae alongside pepper soup. It shouldn't have worked. It worked beautifully. Chidinma's father, a retired engineer who had been quiet and watchful throughout the festivities, pulled Seon-ho aside near the kitchen. "I looked you up," he said. His handshake was firm, his gaze direct. "I know what you were. I know who your family was." Seon-ho met his eyes without flinching. "Yes, sir. My daughter was thrown out of her home like garbage. She called me that night from a shelter, and I couldn't get to her fast enough. That's a failure I'll carry for the rest of my life." His grip tightened. "But when I see her now, the way she walks, the way she laughs, the way she runs this restaurant like she owns the whole damn city, I see my daughter again. The one I raised. The one Marcus nearly destroyed." He paused. "You gave her that back. I don't care what you were. What you are is the man who gave my daughter back to herself. That's enough for me." Seon-ho excused himself to the restroom after that and didn't emerge for 10 minutes. 3 months later, Chidinma sat in a doctor's office on a Tuesday afternoon, staring at a piece of paper that contained 2 words she had been told she would never see. "Test positive." She read it 3 times. She asked the doctor to repeat it. She asked the nurse to confirm. She held the paper up to the light, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less impossible. Pregnant. 6 years. 6 years of injections and procedures and blood tests and ultrasounds that showed nothing. 6 years of Marcus's mounting disappointment, his mother's whispered cruelty, the steady erosion of her identity until she was nothing but a diagnosis, a barren woman, a defective product, a wife who couldn't deliver the one thing she was purchased to provide. The specialist explained what Chidinma had always suspected but never had the emotional space to hear. Her infertility had been primarily stress-induced. Chronic cortisol elevation from years of emotional abuse had disrupted her hormonal balance so severely that conception was physiologically impossible. Not because her body was broken, because her body was under siege, removed from Marcus, surrounded by love instead of blame, safe for the first time in years. Her body had done what no fertility clinic could force. It had healed, quietly, privately on its own timeline. She didn't tell Seon-ho with words. She waited until Sunday evening, until they were on the rooftop, their rooftop, the place where they'd married, the place where he played piano for the world to hear, the place 5 stories above the sidewalk where a woman had once sat in the rain with nothing. The sunset was painting the Seattle skyline in shades of amber and rose. Seon-ho was talking about the New York location, their 6th restaurant, opening next month, the one that would feature a full Korean-Nigerian fusion menu that food critics were already calling the most anticipated opening of the year. Chidinma took his hand. He paused mid-sentence, looking at her. She placed his palm flat against her stomach. 3 seconds of silence. Then the youngest, most disciplined, most controlled man in Seattle's legitimate business world looked at her face, looked at his hand, looked at her face again, and his knees gave out. He dropped to the rooftop like a man whose strings had been cut, both hands now pressed against her belly, his forehead resting against her stomach, his shoulders shaking with sobs that he couldn't have contained if his life depended on it. "I was told I was broken," Chidinma whispered, her fingers in his hair, her own tears falling freely. "My body was just waiting for someone who made it safe enough to heal." Seon-ho looked up at her. His face was wrecked, tears and disbelief and a joy so enormous it seemed to be rearranging his features in real time. "A baby?" His voice cracked on the word. "A baby?" He pressed his ear against her stomach, trying to hear a heartbeat far too small to detect, and laughed. A wet, broken, glorious laugh that echoed off the rooftop and disappeared into the Seattle sky. "I need to learn lullabies," he said against her belly. "Korean ones and Nigerian ones. And I need a bigger piano. And a crib. Do we have a crib? We need a crib. We have 7 months to figure out cribs. I'm going to be terrible at this. You're going to be wonderful at this." He stood, pulled her into his arms, and held her so tightly that the entire city could have collapsed around them, and neither would have noticed. Meanwhile, across Seattle, in an apartment a fraction the size of the home he once owned, Marcus Belmont sat at a folding table reviewing the federal charges his lawyer had just explained to him for the third time. Conspiracy, criminal facilitation, illegal surveillance, obstruction. The Yoon family, left holding useless documents after Sien-ho's transition to legitimacy, had decided that the civilian who had promised them an empire and delivered them nothing was a liability. They didn't harm Marcus. They simply declined to protect him when investigators came asking questions. Every conversation Marcus had with Tae-young, every document he delivered, every payment he'd received for his cooperation was now in federal hands. His PI had been charged separately. The journalist he'd fed information to had published a devastating follow-up. Not about Sien-ho Kong, whose businesses were now spotlessly legal, but about Marcus Belmont himself. Embezzlement from his real estate company, hidden debts, forged documents, a pattern of financial fraud that predated his marriage to Chidinma and explained why he'd been so desperate for control. He'd been hiding his own house of cards the entire time. Brittany, the new wife, the one who was supposed to give him the heir Chidinma couldn't, had left 4 months ago. 18 months of the same controlling behavior, the same impossible standards, the same slow suffocation. She took the dog and the good furniture and left a note that said simply, "Chidinma was right to leave. I'm just sorry it took me this long to figure it out." Marcus Belmont had wanted to drag the Mafia down with him. He had wanted to destroy the man who'd shown his ex-wife kindness. He had reached into a world he didn't understand, armed people he couldn't control, and lit a fuse that burned backward. He didn't destroy Sien-ho. He destroyed himself. Chidinma didn't know any of this. She didn't think about Marcus at all. She was standing on a rooftop with a man who was whispering to her belly in a clumsy mix of Korean and English, planning lullabies and nursery colors, and a future so bright it made the sunset jealous. She was loved. She was whole. She was growing a life inside a body that the world had called broken, and that had simply been waiting. Waiting for safety, waiting for kindness, waiting for a man who looked at a woman sitting in the rain with nothing and said the only words that mattered, "If he doesn't want you, I will." And God help him. He meant every single word. If this story moves something inside you, then you already know you belong right here. Subscribe to Echoed True Stories for more powerful stories of love, second chances, and the kind of strength the world doesn't always recognize. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story. Like this video if you believe that being discarded by the wrong person is just God making room for the right one. Share it with a woman who needs to hear that she was never broken. She was just waiting for someone who made it safe to bloom. And comment worthy if you know, deep in your soul, that your value was never determined by what someone else couldn't see. We love you, we see you, and we'll see you in the next one.